I asked her about that report, but I also looked at statements from Jodi's mother, Jodi's sisters, Jodi's grandparents, and Jodi's siblings, and looking at the issue of Jodi playing the victim.
But you didn't speak to the defendant herself directly about it, did you?
I don't recall if I did or not.
Do your notes reflect that you ever talked to the defendant about that?
My notes don't reflect everything I talked to the victim.
Well, wouldn't it have been important in this case, since we're talking about abuse, to ask the defendant whether or not she had manipulated people into thinking she'd been abused before?
I had talked to her about being abused before, and I never got an impression from her or from other collaterals that she was in the habit of playing the victim. And what I'm looking for are patterns of behavior here, Mr. Martinez, not isolated instances.
I'm not asking about patterns. I'm asking about whether or not you asked her specifically about this issue, about her being accused of playing the victim when she was not abused.
I do not recall, if I ask her specifically.
But isn't that what we're here to discuss? Whether or not the defendant was abused in a domestic violence situation? Isn't that what we're here to discuss?
Yes.
And so...
in the relationship with Mr. Alexander.
I understand that, but we're talking about abuse, though, right?
We're talking about the relationship specifically with Mr. Alexander.
And if in another circumstance the individual had pretended to be a victim of abuse, you don't consider that to be important in your assessment.
This characterizes the notes that were on there and her testimony.
Overruled, you may answer the question.
No other collaterals suggest that Ms. Arias is playing the victim or that she did. In fact, they talk about her being a victim of her father and her mother at times.
Do you consider this information to be so unimportant that you didn't consider it? This information, was it so unimportant to you that you didn't even address it with the defendant?
I am sure I addressed it to some degree.
Then tell me what she said with regard to this issue about playing the victim. Tell me.
Nothing that stands out in my mind.
So you can't tell me anything, correct, about what she said?
I can tell you that she had...
Yes or no? Can you tell me anything that she said with regard to this issue?
I cannot tell you specifics, no.
Ma'am, the other thing that we know is that not only is there this indication that she was manipulated at that age, isn't it true that after...
Testimony, manipulative at that age. That's not what it was.
The same rephrase.
Isn't it true that we know that at that age, whatever the age that was, that she was perceived to be somebody who played the victim even though she was not abused? In addition to that, isn't it true that your investigation revealed...
Overruled.
Isn't it true that your investigation revealed that after she killed Mr. Alexander, she was very manipulative?
After she killed... Well, yes. Part one, I have one collateral source that says she was manipulative. So when you characterize me saying that she was manipulative, that is incorrect. Part two is, yes, I'm not sure what you're talking about in terms, if you could describe what you mean by manipulative.
No.
Afterwards, I would be...
I'm asking you whether or not you remember, as you're sitting there, any information from any source indicating that the defendant was manipulative shortly after she killed Mr. Alexander.
Manipulative regarding what or to whom?
Manipulative do you understand what the word manipulative means, right?
Well, I'm not sure how you mean it, Mr. Martinez.
Use the Webster Dictionary definition of it. What does manipulative mean to you?
Manipulative can mean manipulating facts. It can be deceiving people, is that what you're asking me?
I'm asking you for your definition of manipulative. That's what I'm asking.
If you're asking me if she,
No, I'm not. I'm asking for a definition of Webster's.
He's not allowing her to finish her answer.
Overruled. Ask your next question.
Give me your definition of manipulative, whatever it may be.
my definition?
Yes, as you applied it in this case.
Ask and answer. She already answered the question.
Overruled. You may answer the question.
That someone can manipulate or deceive or, I haven't been asked for a Webster's dictionary definition, but basically that you can manipulate data means you can change them, that you can deceive or tell half-truths, that, you know.
And with regard to the defendant, isn't it true that you received information that she was manipulative shortly after, in her relationship with men, shortly after the killing?
With men?
Yes.
With what men?
Well, do you remember, do you even have any memory of your notes involving what the defendant did after she returned to Wairika?
Oh. Are you talking about her trip to see Ryan in Utah?
No, ma'am.
Are you talking about her experience in the restaurant? I have no idea what specifically, Mr. Martinez, you're talking about.
Do you remember her experiences at the Purple Plum? Do you remember
Yes.
anything about that?
Yes.
And do you remember that you have information involving the Purple Plum with regard to her interaction with men?
Yes.
And that interaction with men indicated that she was...
You may continue.
Ma'am, do you need your notes to refresh your recollection as to the incident at the Purple Plum?
Is this regarding, there were several interviews about the Purple Plum, so I'm not sure which interview you're referring to, Mr. Martinez.
I'm referring to the one involving whether or not the defendant was manipulative with men.
There was an interview with a waitress who said she was manipulative, or was only nice good-looking men.
How about the interview with the manager, Terry Franco? Are you familiar with that?
I am familiar with it. I don't remember every detail of it, if you'd
All right,
like me
let me
to
go
look
ahead
at
and
that.
provide that to you then.
Sure.
Take a look at Exhibit 610. They fit it all, including the margins.
Sure.
I may have it back. You're done reviewing it, correct?
Yes, I am.
These notes are in your handwriting, correct?
Yes, they are.
And you completed them as part of your investigation in this case, correct?
I was taking notes on the interview, yes.
And this is what you did with regard to this investigation. You would look at collateral sources and you would take notes, correct?
Correct.
And you would use them, either then or later, as part of the evaluation. It's something you considered, right?
Yes,
And in this particular case, there was an individual, that was the manager of the Purple Plum, right?
correct.
And you talked to the defendant. She worked at the Purple Plum at some point, right?
Yes, she did.
And when she worked at the Purple Plum, there was this indication, or your investigation revealed, was that the defendant was manipulative towards men, right?
I mean,
Well, ma'am, what do your notes indicate that, well, do you want the date, ma'am? Take a look at the date on Exhibit 610, if that refreshes your recollection as to when this happened. I'll point it out to you.
Okay.
What date are we talking about where this manipulation occurred?
June 13th, '08.
And during this manipulation, it involved men, the defendant and men, correct?
Correct.
And specifically, it involved the defendant, her interaction with men, correct?
Correct.
And your investigation revealed that she would feign.
Approach, please.
And the part of the investigation that you found out was that the defendant was manipulative in her interaction with men, correct?
Overruled. You may answer yes or
Correct.
no.
She was flirtatious with them. I don't know if she was manipulative with them. He says she used them.
All right. Using men, given your previous definition, that's someone who's manipulative, correct?
That would be correct.
And so, given that, isn't that something that it's something that you considered and ultimately rejected in favor of the defendant, right?
Actually, I looked at behavior after the homicide, and that was after the homicide,
Right.
that I would consider would be aberrant behavior, and according to her other history in working in restaurants, that was never part of it. And at working at Casa Ramos, that was not part of it, according to the owner. So I looked at behavior after the murder or after the killing, and I would say that unusual aberrant behavior would be part of that.
And that's your assessment, if you will, of her behavior, correct?
Yes,
And that's your assessment of her behavior, even though the indications are what they are as part of the investigation, correct?
the indications,
Overruled.
the indications, they're contrary indications, with Casa Ramos differently than Purple Plum.
But my point is that you decided to disregard these indications that she was manipulative as part of your assessment in this, as part of your opinion in this case, right?
I didn't disregard them, I considered them.
You considered them, but chose to find them to not be of enough value to factor into your assessment, right?
I factored in behavior her behavior toward men prior to the killing. I factored in her behavior with both restaurants. I factored them all in.
You've already told us that, but my question to you is more pointed. You came in here and you indicated that the defendant was manipulated by Mr. Alexander, correct?
Abused by Mr. Alexander.
All right, and that has a component of manipulation, correct?
Yes, it would.
And in fact, in this particular case, what we have is the defendant exhibiting manipulative behavior after she killed him, right?
Correct.
And what you're saying is, even though she's exhibiting manipulative behavior, I'm not going to believe that manipulative behavior. That's what you're saying, right?
No,
Because
I'm not saying that.
So you
I'm
do
saying I believe that she could have been manipulative with men at that time. I'm not disregarding that.
If she is manipulative with men, you would agree that Travis Alexander was a man, right?
I said she was.
Yes or no?
Her testimony as to when supposed manipulation took place.
Overruled.
Yes or no? Was Mr. Alexander a man?
Yes, he was.
And you just told us that she could be manipulative with men. You just told us that, right?
I said at this period of time, she was manipulative. And in Casa Ramos, which was during that period of time, the statements were that she wasn't. So I have no evidence prior to Mr. Alexander that she was manipulative with men. I just don't have that
What
evidence.
you're telling me is that somebody is telling you, according to you here, that there's no information on the left side, but on the right side, somebody's being very specific that she's manipulative, right? That's what you're telling us.